What I'm going to do is a pocket watch. It's got an added ring around it, and on the back it's got an inlay with a double inlay. So I'm going to do one similar to this, maybe a little more complicated. Okay, the watch that I'm going to do, I've got some madrone burl, which is going to be the body, and then I've got a madrone and maple burl inlay that also has a outline inlay of rosewood, and then the front's going to be a piece of rosewood. Inlays do not just happen, or good ones. If you want a decent inlay, you just about have to work at it and figure out what you have beforehand. That's the inlay that's going into the back. The inlay in the front, it's going to be 155 thousandths wide. And how do I know that? Because I planned it. Doing an inlay, and let's say we put an inlay inside of that. I saw some flinches when I mentioned thousandths. Let's just go easy. Let's say that this outside one is 1 inch. Okay, if I wanted an 1/8 of an inch line around that, say this is going to be our dark inlay all the way around. If I wanted that to be 1/8 of an inch wide, then this side on the inside would have to be 3/4. 1/8 and 1/8. Remember, if you have something round, you're working both sides. You're not just working one. So that's how you establish what I call the accent ring is going to be. When you get into something like that, now you're really getting into some measurements. That little black ring is an inlay. That's put inside of it, and all three of them are put in the other piece, and that's all going to be put into another accent line. Now naturally I can't do this one. I don't have time to do that here, but I pre-did it at home. It takes some time, but putting it all together here, that I can do. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is put this on the outside of my chuck. What do you mean I'm going to put it on the outside of my chuck? If I have it on the inside of my chuck, inside of the jaws as such, I've got half of the piece almost behind the jaws and I can't get to it. Most people are under the assumption that when you put a piece into the chuck, when you grab it, that's your hold. That's 1/2 of it. The other half is the piece that goes up against the face of the jaws. Or it could be the bottom of the jaws. But somewhere it has to seat itself. And the reason I say that, when you have it locked in for the diameter, you're compressing the diameter. If you didn't have something to stop it, it would give it a rock, or you could rock it. So to stop that, you make a nice clean cut where it's up tight against the jaws. It's not going anywhere. I mean, as you can see, what I've got, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and I've got all the faith in the world in that because it can't rock. Okay, I think you can understand now what I said about getting it on the outside of the jaws. I've got my watch outside where I can do shaping both directions and at least get an idea of what I want width-wise. Everybody with me there? first thing I have to do is put in my large size inlay. If you tried to do it the other way around, it's just not going to work. What I did to develop these, I took a piece of scrap, faced it off, put double face tape on, to put it on there and actually turned my diameters. Again, I used my micrometer, not only to measure the diameter, but when you go up with the micrometer and catch that, if that is not perfectly straight, you see a taper in it. And you don't want a taper in this thing, because if you do, it goes in much easier, but when you start cutting off in the top, you start developing a gap around it, so you want everything as straight and clean as you can get it. That way your inlays stay tight. Nice tool, huh? Okay, I use nothing but a 1/4 inch square scraper. Now it does have a couple of things that I've done to it. I've knocked off the one side. This little piece right here on the edge, that is the original tool. And I save that so that when I start a hole, I can lay that up against the hole and just slide it along, and it'll just make a continuation of that hole instead of opening it or closing it one way or the other. I've backed off the end a little bit, and it's nothing sharpening, nothing more than just a scraper. I've backed it off on the bottom again just to keep things out of the way. Now, if I didn't take this corner and knock it off, at center line, that would be hitting the bottom of the circle that I'm boring, and it wouldn't allow the tool to cut. Everybody understand what I'm saying? So I just have to get rid of that. So I just go to the grinder and I grind that. Works like a charm. I can bore a hole cleaner and more accurately than I can drill it. And I have a lot of folks tell me, well, why don't you just drill it and use a plug cutter and make your inlays that way? Number one, it turns me off. Number two, I couldn't even come close to doing what I can with this. And I would be limited to a drill size. I have no limitations with this. I can drill whatever hole I want. Now I'm probably doing something that you're not catching. When I'm going in, I'm looking down at my ways on the lathe, and I'm lining the tool up with that. That should give me a straight shot in, and all I have to do is advance it. When I do make my inlays, I bump one side on a sander to get it flat. Then that is what goes against my face or my scrap block when I turn this. So I know that that surface and this diameter are square. If I put it in the other way, it's not going to be square. Like that, did you? Yep, I didn't get that corner quite clean. I'll clean that out. Okay, she's pretty flat on the bottom. Now I'm not going to take and glue the bottom because that's going to come out. Because I have to drill that out to put a face in there. So I'm using a medium cyanacrylate to put this in. I'm going to put just a little around the very corner because that's going to be in there tight. You can hear it's down on the bottom. Now I'm going to go around the joint with the thin stuff. Probably would be better if I had taken it off, but it'll work. Now I'm going to have to put, this is a piece of the same material that the watch body is made out of. So I want that to look, you know, like this has just been put in to the watch, and this is just an extension of it. I used the Satellite City. I like that. There's some of the stuff is in oval bottles. I've never really had a problem with it, but I've used this stuff since it came out, and again, I'm from that Ike era. I've never had a problem with this stuff, so why use something else that may give me a problem? Now, again, I told you this morning about putting the tips in acetone. That's neat. When I get couple bottles of this, I date it, throw it in the freezer. It prolongs the life. When I'm home, I never put the cap on. Every time I put the cap on at home, I end up with the tips plugging up. When I'm done, I normally give it a tap, break the bubble in it. It's good to go. Okay, we're back to putting in a piece of the original material that the body is made out of. I know it's still too big, but I'm not too proud to try it. I found a long time ago it's much easier to take a second cut than trying to put that wood back on. Okay, if I put it in there, I won't get it back out. Clean up the bottom of that hole a little bit. Okay, I want to make sure that That's going to be in there nice and tight. I don't want any gaps, so I'm going to take the thin stuff and run around the inside. So I'm going to be drilling that hole out now. With the maple burl, you don't see it too much, but if you had a grain, I would line the grain up, just so it looks like it was a continuation of the piece, so that someone looks at that and say, wow, that's one piece of wood. How did you do that? Carefully. Now I'm going to drill the 1 3/8 hole for the clock. That's what they take. Now I'm not going to be able to drill the hole all the way deep on kind of the spur. Probably in this case it wouldn't matter, for the simple reason that I'm going to have an inlay back of it, but I'd still just as soon not have, I'd like to have it done right, what I feel is right. So I'll go through it just like if we were not putting an inlay in the back. That way you would have your solid back without a hole in it. I've been asked, why don't you just cut that point off? You could, but then you've ruined the drill because it will not drill. That's the start of the drill, and it has to have that for the cutters to pick up on. Okay, now when we go up in there, I know some of the faces are here from this morning, some of them aren't, but a drill or a lathe always has a little bit of play in it. And if you have it locked in its most out of aligned position, you're going to have an oversized hole. So I just leave everything loose, and I'll just advance this. Now the point has picked it up, and it's rotated around the point, which has aligned the bore the best you can get it. Now again, it made a little bit of a move towards me. I don't know if you can watch. I'll bring it in slow. Watch and see if you can see it. It's very little, but it made just a slight move over towards me. So now it's sitting there the best I can get it. Now I'll drill it. Okay, I just went through the inlay that I put in there. I was just making sure that it wasn't wet. When you use super glue, say you're gluing something on, and if you can, line it up with the tailstock and get everything ready. And then just back your tailstock off and put your super glue on one piece and hit the other with the accelerator and slap them together quick if you can, have them aligned. If you have to do it some other way, then watch what you do with the accelerator. The reason I say if you can put the accelerator on, sometimes when you put the glue on one piece, close it up, and you get the squeeze out. So you take and hit that with the accelerator. It cures just like that. So you knock that edge off a little bit, and the piece falls off because it has not cured on the inside. In other words, the outside sealed it and it quit curing. So I just looked to make sure that it was dry so I didn't get it on me. Okay, now I'm going to have to deepen that hole a little bit. Now here's where that little piece on the side really works good. I'll just go in here and lay it up alongside of it and then just advance it. Now I want to recess my clock down into there a little bit. In other words, I don't want it just sitting on the top. I want it to be down a little lower. In other words, if you look to wherever that watch is, the watch itself is probably even up with the top of the bead. So I've just taken this and gone down. That means you have to have minimum of 1/4 of an inch. Now I like to go just a shade more. Just going in and cleaning that glue off of it. Being careful, I don't want to take the bead in, because that'd leave me a black ring around it. I want to keep it right on the outside if I can. Pretty good. I may go just a touch more. Now, when I go to turn this around, I'm going to be lost as to where my bottom is. So what I do is I put my scale in and I sight across the top and bottom. And I've got about a 1/2 inch, which I probably should go just a little more to give myself a little more room in there. Sometimes you can make things too close. Bottom to the top of the beads. Now I've got almost 7/16, a little less. So when I turn this around, I'll be able to come the opposite way and see where I need to be here. Yep, we can straighten that one out. Now you can see why I put it on the outside of the chuck. I can start making my whole shape on it. I can feel that it's not smooth. That's better. If you notice, I'm taking a little care when I sand. If you put detail into something, I think it's kind of sad to see somebody sand it all out. You know, so if you're doing that, take your time and actually sand it properly. sanding the front because when I turn it around, I will not be able to get at this easily.
What grits are you using?
What grits?
Yes.
I'm losing who said that. I'm starting with 240, 300, 406. Now, I will say, I got a mark in there I don't like. I will say if you have not made the surface good enough to start with that, start with the proper grit. If you start with 240 on a 110 grit or 100 grit, you are getting yourself into trouble. Use a heavy enough grit to take and get rid of whatever you have as defaults. If you take a finer grit and just keep sanding with that grit, you're going to take and end up getting a washboard effect. The end grain will sand much harder than what face grain will. So you'll end up getting a high and a low effect. Now, if you have to start with something like 36, then I would say get some lessons. This is probably the hardest part, is getting that bead clean and keeping it to full width at the bottom. Now I'm going to put some depth on there. Okay, we're ready to turn that around. Now, years ago, when I was doing the art shows, to turn that around, I would make a jam chuck. In other words, I would put a piece of scrap in there and make it a tight fit so that I could just stick it on the jam chuck and finish the back. Well, if you do enough of those, pretty soon you wear that jam chuck out and you got to make another, or sometimes one wood drills a little differently than another and you got to put a piece of paper in it. So I called up Vic Mark, who I knew, and I asked him if I design you or draw you a set of jaws, will you make them for me? He said yes. So I did. That's the end result. But there's something to be said about making something that suits you. And the only reason these went on the market was enough people saw me use them and asked them if they could get them, so he made them a stock item then. But I feel good that I have something that worked for me. And if somebody else can use it, fine.
That's why I was asking, is that I didn't know, I wanted to know if they were still.
They're called extended jaws. Unless you look in Vic Mark's catalog, then they're called Dick Sing jaws. They also drill pen blanks really nice because it locates them automatically. Now I'm going to put the contrast ring in the bottom of this, in the back side. Now if you hear a clanking of the metal against metal, I can come up here and my center, or my inside, is right about there. So I've got a quarter minus a 16th. I should have about 3/16 in there. Now, I've never been able to leave things alone. So I made myself a calipers that go between the chuck, and I go in there, and I got a quarter of an inch. All it is 1/16 aluminum. The calibrated, I stuck an 1/8 inch in, marked it, stuck a quarter inch, marked it. I'm not worried about being real precise. I want a close estimate of where I'm at. Being 1/16, it allows me to go between the jaws, so it works. Now, why would I worry about getting so thin in there? I've seen pocket watches that people have made that have a hard time going in the watch pocket, and I don't like that. If you're going to make something small and delicate, make it small and delicate. You know, take the time and do what's needed. You can hear it's getting thinner. Just checking to make sure it's flat. Really close. Now what I did, sometimes you can't hardly see. So I've actually put the tool in the hole and brought it back on that original surface. And as I brought it out, I knew when it came out, so I just slowly moved it over just enough. I felt it more than I saw it, and then made my second cut.
Not glue the bottom of that because it would expand?
No, I'm going to cut it out. So there's really no reason for me to make a bigger mess here. And all I'm doing is tapping to make sure that it's down nice and tight. You folks ever have a problem with your glue falling off the lathe and stuff? Magnets. The little bottles are McCormick spices with the lids cut off. Drill, I think it was an inch and 3/4 hole with a Forstner bit, and I just press in. But I got 3 small magnets underneath, and set it down and never falls off the lathe. Now if you're frugal, you have another inlay. Now I don't know if you saw that, I was angling down a little bit and it didn't want to cut because I was hitting on the side. So I brought it back up where it was supposed to be, and it just cut right in. So you have to kind of keep it at least center line, or even sometimes I'll go above center line to make sure that I'm clearing the radius. Okay, I've got a little bit of glue right on the corner where I'm trying to cut. So to get rid of that, I just lay a piece of sandpaper on the ways of the lathe, pull the tool over it. Now I should have that corner clean. Sometimes the side gets it also. Okay, I'm being careful here for two reasons. There we go, right there. If I put it in, it won't come out. I don't have much material that's glued to that wall. So I wanted to make sure that I glued it good. Probably by rights I should have taken the thin stuff and gone on this side right off the bat, because I'm down to, I think there's about 40 thousandths there, so roughly a 32nd of an inch. And this one I just want it to be tight. Now, whoever asked before about that bottom gluing, this time it's getting it, because it's not coming out anymore. Now, making these inlays, you have grain going in all directions. You have different consistencies of wood. Some are hard, some are soft. I was having a real time getting that smooth. I could shear scrape it, I could scrape it, I could sand it, and I'd always be able to feel those. So one day I was playing with the skew and I said, I'll try that. Well, it works great, but I don't approach it like a skew. I approach this where that edge is 90 degrees to the surface of the wood. In other words, when it comes in here, everything's going to be 90 degrees to it, to the surface, just like a normal scraper. If I had made this one surface as a scraper, this would have been out here probably another 3/8 of an inch, and it had been so brittle, probably the first time I tried to use it, I'd have snapped it off. So I just use it in a scraper mode, but it's very, very sharp in relation to a scraper. Not meant to move a whole lot of wood, it's meant to make things clean. Now on these jaws, I can go in here and shape about anything I want. And I've got a little crown on it because I've never seen a flat watch yet. Okay, that maple burl on the inside has a couple little pits in it. So I'm just going to go in and put super glue on that inlay. Now, if I'm using the hand spray accelerator, I like to wait just a little bit because it will turn things white. It'll accelerate it faster. I'm sure you've seen the new spray cans. They will not create so much of that white film It's not as violent as what this stuff is with that angle. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to do this and use a jam chuck. When you do, make sure the face of that jam chuck is flat to match the flatness in there. When that goes in, it's going to seat tight and keep it from rocking. Terrible looking, ain't it? Always amazes me when you put finish on a piece, just how much more it brings it out. I use an offset chuck. Axminster makes one, and it becomes a real bunch of steps. If you like it, it's great. If you're not patient, it's mean. But the thing, if you take a look at these little lines around there, they're all pretty uniform. They're all within, I would say, 2 or 3 thousandths. 5 thousandths is the thickness of a piece of paper. Do they need to be that close? I feel that they do. If you're making something like that with 3 identical pieces in it, boy, they better match, especially at something that size. If it's bigger, you get away with a little bit more than you do if it's not. Okay, I don't feel they're finished unless they have a harp on them. And that's not a fob. Most people think that's the fob. The fob is on the end of the chain that goes in your pocket. But that's a harp. Now, the hard part is putting that harp on the center and lining everything up. You're working in 2 different radiuses at the same time. So I made myself a jig. It's a V block. And an 1 3/8 that is centered over the V. That holds the clock. Now I go to my drill press and I take a straight board and clamp it down alongside of here where my quill touches the center of that V. Then I can slide this along the board. Okay, that already has automatically lined me up with the top dead center. Then I take my drill and I turn it until I can see the 2 edges of the flutes where I want it. Then I drill that. My first ones were a lot of failures, and nothing was ever straight and clean on it. But once you do that, this automatically lines it up with the diameter, and then you can slide it up and down the board to line it up with the thickness of it. And you've got yourself a pocket watch.